Let's create our virtual network and subnets. So we have our resource group already, rg-dc-and-fs. So search the marketplace, so we type virtual networks. Okay, so this one, and we wait for it to load. So we select virtual network by Microsoft, create, and we select virtual network. So create virtual network, so we will need to go through basic security and other tabs, so subscription, resource group. So for the first required is the virtual network name, so we type in vnet and we put in Queryunity. So Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia should be okay for us, the region. So security, will not check anything for now, okay? So on the later videos or tutorials, we may touch the other security settings of a virtual network. So click next. IP addresses, so the default one is okay in our requirement, 10.0.0.0/16. So however, for the subnets, so we will delete and create our two subnets. So for our first subnet, we will click add a subnet and wait for it to launch. Okay, so we have add a subnet, the purpose is default, and you have other options here. So for our case is default. For the name is snet. So snet -server subnet. So the IP range, this is the CIDR for the VNet. So for the starting address is 10.0.10/24. So we will not check anything yet here. So private subnet, NAT gateway, NSG, network security group, RT for route table, and other endpoints. So click add. So we now have our first subnet. So for our second subnet, the same step. So click add a subnet and the purpose will be default. The name, we have to rename it to a more descriptive name. So snet for subnet, and you have client. So the same IP address range from our virtual network. So it has its own suggestions, but our requirement is 10.0.20.0/24. No other settings here, private subnet or security or route table. So click add. And we now have our two subnets based on our requirement. So we'll continue our setup. So click next. To go to tags, so we don't add tags for this tutorial. So click next. And it will do a validation. Okay, so validation has been done. Subscription, the RG, the name, and security that we have unticked, and the IP addresses for the subnet and the CIDR, and we can now create after we review and click create. Alright, deployment succeeded, so we can go to the resource. And we now have our VNet. For added verification, so address space, it's here, subnets, it's there, we have two our subnets, so should be okay. And we can go back to the resource group and continue on our next step number 2, which is to create other resources such as the virtual machine. Okay, so let's go back to our resource group. And as you can see, we have our first resource in step number 1, which is the virtual network. So let's add another resource, which will be our virtual machine. So we will start with the server. So you type virtual machine in the search marketplace, wait for the loading of the possible virtual machine options in the marketplace, and we'll select Microsoft virtual machine, so you can create the infrastructure as a service, Linux or Windows operating systems. So click create, and we will be on the virtual machine page in a short while. Okay, so we are now at the create a virtual machine, and we have some Copilot stuff that we can select to, for example, help me create a low-cost VM. So if you notice, we have more tabs than the virtual network. So basics, this networking, because of course virtual machine has more settings than a virtual network per se in that creation. So we still have subscription, resource group, then the VM name will be VM server. So for the purposes of this demonstration, so region will be same, Southeast Asia. No redundancy required for this demonstration. Of course, there are reasons you will select availability options. Security type, so we'll just select standard for our demonstration. So select Windows Server, so 2019 data center. Of course, we can opt with the latest one, 2022. But for this demonstration, let's select 2019. So x64. So we have the VM size. So VM size, so if you hover to the information, so it determines the factors such as processing power, memory, and storage capacity. So that's why on the drop down you will see how many CPU, how many memory assignment for this particular size, and you'll see all the other sizes, and you have some glimpse of the recently used ones and recommended by the image publisher, as well as the estimated cost per month. So if we go to see all sizes, because we will like to select more or find our appropriate size for this demonstration. So select a VM size as launch, and you could see SKUs here. So most used by Azure users, we have the B series and its explanation. So what is for ideal for workloads that do not need continuous full performance, and we have D series as well, so recommended for general purpose. For our demonstration, let's just select B series V2, and let's just select V2S. So 2 vCPU, 8 gig of RAM, max IOPS is 3750. So okay, VM size is done. Standard V2S V2, again for demonstration purposes only, we don't select this one. So username VM admin, so this will be the administrator account, and we key in our password and we confirm our password. So we have key in the password and confirm password. So inbound port rules, yes, we will allow RDP. So next is for licensing. So next, disk. So we'll wait for it. So we have image, so let's just select a lower one, again for demonstration purposes only. So we can select standard SSD, and it will show the possible options. E10, just now it's P, so E10. So next will be, okay, so this one is the password. So delete with VM this OS disk, so we're okay with that. So key management, so we don't need a data disk for this server. So next will be networking. Okay, so this will be for the network interface for the VM. So we only have one virtual network, VNet Inquiry. So this is for the server, so we'll select the server. Public IP, yes, we do need, again for this demonstration purposes, we need to RDP. Security group, that should be okay. To allow 3389, delete public IP and the NIC when VM is deleted, yes, we are okay. Accelerated networking, we don't have any Azure load balancer or gateway for our load balancing options. Okay, so we still about here, networking, few more tabs to go. So next is management. So Defender for Cloud, so we are given some free identity, we don't assign it yet. Entra ID, we don't have an Entra ID for this demonstration. Auto shutdown should be okay. Then guest updates, we don't need for this demonstration. Okay, so next is monitoring. So we don't do some boot diagnostics. Again, this is for tutorial purposes only. So of course production, we will have these settings and other of these settings. So next will be advanced. So extensions, if you have some extensions, VM application, and you have some custom installations. And finally, we'll have the tags, and it will do a review and create after if you have no tags to indicate. So let's click next, review and create, and it will validate, see if what we have selected is okay. And yes, you have this standard B2S with this per hour charge, and by clicking create you agree, and you have been notified that you have opened the RDP port that is open to the internet because it will have a public IP. You have the disk. So once you have reviewed everything, correct subnet and so on and so forth, then we can click create. Alright, so it says your deployment is complete, and we have this VM, IP and NSG, but let's take a look at our resource group and what are the resources that were added when we deployed that virtual machine. So it has the virtual machine, the public IP, the network security group, and NIC, network interface, and the OS disk. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 resources that were added, and next will be the creation of another virtual machine. But before we go and create another virtual machine, so our requirement for this server is to have a specific IP that will be 10.0.10.10. So how to do that will be to go to the network interface, and under the settings you have IP configurations. So it should launch the IP configurations. Okay, so IP configurations, and if you scroll down, so we have IP config 1 and it has a dynamic IP. So we need to click on this and edit its parameter. Okay, so we have the private IP address settings. The allocation is dynamic, so we need to select static, and we need to change that 4 to .10, the fourth octet. So we click save, and that should be the changes that we need to made on the network interface. So if you can see, the IP config 1 is now with the static, not dynamic, and the IP address is 10.0.10.10 instead of .4. So in creating resources, I just would like to show you in Marketplace. So you could also search for the Windows Server. So instead of that virtual machine, so it's still from Microsoft. So Windows Server. So if you select this one and create, and you have some options here that already are Windows virtual machines. For the purposes of speeding up this tutorial, so we go to create a virtual machine, and I've already inputted all the required for at least for the basics. So you have the name, so it is in Southeast Asia. We have Windows 11 Pro, we have selected the size, and we have typed our administrator account and password, allow RDP 2389, and confirm the licensing. So next will be the disk, and we will select standard, the same. We'll select 128, and we still select the same settings. and we don't have any data disk. Next will be networking. So correct VNet, correct subnet. This time it was client, so public IP we still need to RDP for demonstration purposes only. So allow RDP, delete the NIC when the VM is deleted, and we have the same load balancing options. So we have been go through here with the management and monitoring. So I'll just go and straight ahead and go to the tabs. So disable the boot diagnostics, advanced, so we don't have any extensions, tags, and we are good to go to create. Okay, so I have some issues deploying a Windows 11, not because some settings were wrong, but my subscription has some limitations on what could be deployed. So I'm using this Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, and so to us to continue, we'll just deploy a server similar to our VM server to act as a client. So for the image, I will make it as a server. So perhaps I'll just select 2016 to allow her to distinguish from our VM server to our client, which is still a server, but obviously Windows 11 Pro, which should be the suitable client operating systems. But nevertheless, for us to continue with the tutorial, we just deploy the server image to act as a client. So I will deploy with the following settings. So validation has passed, and I have selected the Windows Server 2016 to act as our VM client. So we now can click create. So we still selected SNet client, and we can now go ahead to click the create button to create the virtual machine. So our deployment is complete. So we just go to resource group to verify the added resources. So we have the VM client, the IP, the NSG, and the network interface, and the OS disk. So similarly, we go to the network interface and edit the IP configuration of this VM and change the default IP. So this is dynamic, so we'll make it a static. So it's 10.0.20.4. Now we make it a static, and we will put in 100 as the requirement for our demonstration. Click save, and we should be updating the network interface. Okay, so for step 3 is to promote this server to domain controller. So this is our VM server that we have deployed in Azure, and name, and it has the IP address assigned. So we click on manage to add the roles. So click next, so 10.0.10.10, and we select Active Directory Domain Services. Click next. So we have the features. So for example, the group policy management is also checked. Click next, and we have to restart the destination if the server automatically if required. So we can leave it unchecked and reboot ourselves manually. So these are the confirmation of the roles that will be added. So install. So first step is to add the roles, that is the Active Directory Domain Services. So the installation for the Active Directory services is completed. So you'll notice here post deployment configuration, and you have the promote the server to a domain controller. So to continue the promotion of this server to become a domain controller, so you have to go through these steps. So deployment configuration until the installation. So we don't have a domain, we don't have an existing forest, so our selection for the deployment operation will be to add a new forest. So inquirility.local for our tutorial purposes only. So click next. So the functional level selection and the domain functional level selection. So as you can see, so although we are a 2019 server, so if we go to system and we'll have this edition 2019 data center, so the forest functional level is up to 2016 as well as the domain functional level. So I've keyed in the DSRM or directory services restore mode password, so we can click next. So we'll select DNS as well, so domain name system DNS server, so click next. So delegation, so click next, and you have the NetBIOS name. Okay, so the NetBIOS domain name will be Inquirinity. So next is the paths. Okay, so these are the default locations. Of course, you can change it. So this will be the default location for the database, the logs, and the sysvol folder. So review options will be to counter check if your promotion settings are correct to your liking, and if they are correct, you can also view script, but we can click next. And to check any prerequisites and to be validated, all prerequisite checks pass successfully, so click install, and it will install or promote this server to become a domain controller. Okay, our server is back after reboot. So if you launch the server manager, you'll see the domain name inquirinity.local, and if you double check the user that is logged in, so who am I, and you'll notice the user is the domain user or the domain administrator inquirinity/vm. Finally, from the tools, you'll see the Active Directory options here. So you have Active Directory users and computers, sites and services, domains and trust, and just for testing, we can launch, and we have our domain inquirinity.local. You have the built-in containers, computers, and users, and it's from where we'll create our users. Before we remote in to our client, so we come back to the Azure portal, and on the network interface of the client network interface, so we launch this one, settings, and we go to DNS servers, and we have inherit from virtual network, so we would like to override this, and we need to point it to our DNS server, which is the VM server, so 10.0.10.10. So this is the IP of the VM server, which is the 2019 server. So click save, and that should be it, and we will be remoting in to the server after this configuration is completed. So after we have rebooted our virtual machine to apply the DNS settings, so we have remoted to our VM client, so still at workgroup, and as you can see on the Ethernet details, so it has this IP, and you notice the DNS server is the VM server IP address. So we will need to check first if it can resolve the name of the VM server. To verify our DNS functionality, we can use the command line utility. So we have opened the CLI. So let's ping first the server before we do ping some names. So yes, so we could reach the other side, the server. Can we ping the domain name that we have chosen? So ping inquirinity.local, and yes, we are able to ping. And finally, can we ping the fully qualified domain name? So that will be vm-server.inquirinity.local. So, and yes, the fully qualified domain name was resolved to this IP address. So now for the final step or final task for this step number 3, which is to join this client to the domain. So local server, workgroup, and you see workgroup is workgroup, so click change, so it should be a member of the domain. So we type in the domain name in queryunity.local, click OK, and it should prompt the username and password for us to join. Since we don't have any users created yet on the Active Directory users and computers, so we'll just make use of the domain admin. So VM admin, and provided the credentials or the password was typed correctly, so click OK. And you have the welcome to the incurity.local domain. So once we click OK, it will ask us to restart, and the VM client will be joined to the domain. Our VM client is back from the reboot. So as you can see, so local server under server manager, so the domain name is now incurity.local. Windows firewall is domain, and we have logged in with our domain admin user since we don't have any domain users yet. So who am I will return to incurity VM admin. And that's it for this part number 1, which is to join to the domain, or the client to join to the domain controller. Just a quick verification before we end our part 1. So we are back at the VM server. So as you notice, we have the domain controllers. So we have opened up Active Directory users and computers. So we expand in queryunity.local domain. Under the domain controllers, we only have one, which is the VM-server, and we have joined one client, which is the VM-client. So this proves that the client was indeed joined to this domain, and we have our VM server. So catch the next or continuation for this tutorial series. See you on part number 2.